What happens when your wildest dream becomes real, but you can't tell the people who made you feel like dreaming was a joke? Stay with me. My name is Lila Nguyen, and this is the story of the game that changed my life, and the family who almost broke me before it ever saw the light. This isn't just a story about ambition or success. It's about memory, silence, and the things we leave unsaid, especially in families like mine. Vietnamese-American, tradition-bound, and terrified of the unknown. I'm Lila. I'm 28. I live in San Francisco, and I make video games, professionally. I'm the creative director of a small indie studio called Lunar Labs. You might have heard of our game, Starbound Odyssey. But if my parents are watching this, they probably think I work in IT support. To understand why, you'd have to go back to the night I got the email. It was raining, the soft kind of rain that made the city feel washed clean, at least for a moment. I was sitting on my tiny couch, legs curled under me, the faded blanket I bought from a thrift shop wrapped around my shoulders. My laptop chimed. I clicked it open, expecting spam, maybe a beta tester update. But then I saw the subject line, Nominee, Game Developers Choice Awards, Starbound Odyssey. My heart stuttered. I blinked, once, twice, just to make sure the letters didn't rearrange themselves. But they didn't. They stayed. Real, heavy, thrilling, and then almost immediately I felt nothing. No tears, no scream, no celebration, just a hollow silence. Because the first person I thought of was my dad, and not in the way you might expect. I thought of his office in Irvine, how I used to sneak into it late at night when the house was asleep. I'd sit in his old leather chair, my legs too short to reach the ground, and boot up that dusty Windows XP machine. The whirring fan, the glowing screen, the smell of warm plastic and carpet shampoo, it's still with me. That's where I first played Chrono Trigger. Not for the graphics, they were ancient even then, but for the feeling. That you could leave one world and enter another, that you could control time, save lives, rewrite fate, even if you were just a 10-year-old girl hiding from bedtime. I'd play for hours until I heard footsteps creaking outside the hallway, and I'd scramble to shut it down, heart racing, afraid of getting caught. But I never stopped. In the mornings, while Mom packed Sophie's violin or helped her highlight anatomy textbooks, I'd be sketching characters in the margins of my homework. Dragons, space captains, pixelated forests. Dreams, mostly. My dreams. "You need to stop this nonsense, Lila," Mom would say, flicking her hand at my notebook like it was dirty. "Games are for kids, not girls who want to make anything of themselves." She was a surgeon. Dad was a software engineer. My sister? A prodigy. At 10, Sophie was winning science fairs. At 12, she was dissecting frogs in the garage with surgical precision. Me? I was naming planets and drawing galaxies with pens that always ran out halfway through a sketch. I used to think maybe, just maybe, they'd see what I saw. The possibility, the story inside the game, the way someone, anyone, could find themselves through a screen. But they didn't. Not then. Back in my apartment, I closed the email and stared at my reflection in the darkened laptop screen. Same tired eyes, same cheap hoodie, same knot in my stomach. Why couldn't I be proud? Because in 2 days, I was flying back to Irvine. Family reunion, Sophie's engagement party. Everyone would be there. The aunties with their perfect eyebrows and sharper tongues. The cousins who whispered when I walked into a room. My parents. And they still thought I was a college dropout, finding herself. I had every reason to tell them, to show them, but I didn't. Because some part of me needed to know, if they still thought I was nothing, would it matter if I was everything? I reached for the photo frame on my bookshelf, the only one I'd kept. It was old, worn from too many moves and not enough care. Our family posing in front of the house in Irvine, Sophie in the center holding her first-place science trophy, Dad's hand on her shoulder, Mom beaming, me at the edge, clutching a game magazine no one had noticed I was holding. Even now I could feel the sting, the quiet way I had always stood just slightly outside the frame. "They called me a dreamer," I whispered aloud, "but tonight I'll face the family who never believed in me." The city pulsed outside, glowing taillights and rain-slicked streets and someone shouting into the wind. Inside, it was just me, my suitcase, and the storm I was about to walk into. But to understand why this reunion feels like walking into fire, you need to know where it all began. The sky over Irvine always looked too clean, like someone had photoshopped the clouds away. It used to feel like home, but now it just felt like a stage, freshly swept, waiting for a show I didn't want to be in. The driveway was packed. My dad's car, the same silver Lexus he's had since I was in high school, was still parked at an exact angle. He used to measure it against the sidewalk like geometry was sacred. The hedges were trimmed within an inch of their lives, and the front door, wide open, letting out a burst of laughter and the clinking of glass. I hesitated at the steps. Inside, I knew were people who still thought I was a failure. But before I get to that night, the one where everything cracked open, you have to understand what it was like growing up inside their dream. Back then, our house was always too bright. Overhead LEDs in every room, glass windows scrubbed so clean they almost hurt your eyes. It was my mom's version of order, antiseptic, precise, like the operating room she spent most of her life in. I was 16 the night it hit me that I didn't belong. Sophie had just gotten her early acceptance to Johns Hopkins. She wasn't even 17 yet. The living room was bursting. Uncles, aunts, distant cousins who only showed up for milestones. Everyone holding wine glasses or teacups, passing around spring rolls and beaming with pride. "She's going to be a doctor just like someone said, patting Sophie's back. "Top of her class, of course," Mom added with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We're so proud." Sophie stood there, poised and polished, in her baby pink blouse and a delicate necklace I'd never seen before. Her hair was curled at the ends, her smile picture perfect. The prodigy. And me? I was on the floor, cross-legged behind the couch, sketchpad open on my knees. I hadn't even realized how quiet I'd gone until someone kicked my toe by accident. "Oh, Lila, you're still here," one of the aunties chuckled. "What are you drawing this time? More cartoons?" I closed the sketchpad, just like that. No one noticed. Later that night, when the house was quieter, I walked into the kitchen to find Mom slicing fruit with the same scalpel-like precision she used for everything. She barely looked up. "Don't stay up late. You have your chemistry exam." I already studied. "Then study more." I hesitated. My hands were shaking just a little. I didn't even know if it was from fear or frustration. "Mom, I don't want to be a doctor." The blade paused mid-slice. "What?" I swallowed hard. "I want to design games, like real ones. I've been researching programs. USC has a game design track and—" Her laugh was quiet, sharp. "Games? You want to waste your life on toys?" "They're not toys," I said, voice rising. "They're art. They tell stories. People feel things. Enough." She didn't yell. She didn't have to. Her voice could slice you thinner than any knife. "Your cousin's going to Stanford. Your sister's headed to Johns Hopkins. And you want to draw monsters? They're not monsters." She set the knife down and turned toward me, her arms crossed over her lab coat. "Lila, we didn't come to this country so our daughter could become a joke." I didn't cry. Not then. Not even when Dad came in later, patted me on the shoulder like it was a reflex. "You're good at math," he said gently. "Stick with science. You'll be secure." Secure. That was the golden word in our house. Not joy, not meaning. Security. I wanted to scream that I didn't care about being secure. I cared about building worlds, about creating something that made people feel the way Chrono Trigger had made me feel when I was 10 and lonely, but I just nodded. And upstairs in the dark, I pulled my sketchpad out again. The drawing was smudged, a starship pilot mid-leap, chasing a falling planet. Her face looked a little like mine. Even then, I was designing Starbound Odyssey and didn't even know it. I kept drawing, quietly, always quietly. The days kept passing. SAT prep, AP bio, piano practice, even though my fingers ached from hours at the keyboard. Not music, code. Sophie would walk past my door sometimes and laugh when she saw the blue light from my screen. "Still playing that silly game?" "It's not silly," I'd mumble. She'd lean on the doorframe, her perfect ponytail bouncing. "You know Mom's never going to be okay with this, right?" "I don't need her to be." "Sure," she said, already halfway down the hall, "until you need rent money." It always came back to money, to shame, to the image of the Nguyen family as high-achieving, noble, and above reproach. Failures were not spoken about. They were erased. So I played the role. Got into UCLA for computer science, made them proud, or at least less worried. But even then, between the data structures and programming labs, I was building Starbound Odyssey piece by piece. In secret. Back in present-day Irvine, I pulled my suitcase up the steps and rang the doorbell, even though I knew it would be unlocked. The door opened. There was Sophie, radiant, tanned, perfectly made up. Her engagement ring sparkled like it had its own spotlight. "Well, well," she said, arms crossed. "The dreamer returns." I smiled tight. "Hey, Soph." Inside, the house hadn't changed. Not really. Same cold floors, same overachiever shrine of family photos on the stairwell wall, Sophie in her lab coat, Sophie at her white coat ceremony, Sophie shaking hands with someone important. Me? One middle school photo hidden behind a potted plant. Mom was in the kitchen, Dad in the living room with uncles talking about stocks. The smell of ginger, soy, and lemon hung in the air. It should have been comforting. Instead, it made me feel like I was 16 again, clutching a dream no one could see. I slipped into the hallway and took a deep breath. If they still thought I was the failure, I was going to let them, because I had a plan, and it was already in motion. UCLA's campus had always looked like a postcard. Sunlight bouncing off red brick buildings, kids in hoodies carrying coffee and ambition in equal measure. It should have felt like the dream. In a way, it was, at least on paper. I told everyone I was majoring in computer science, and technically, I was. But in between algorithms and systems design, I was building something else. Something that didn't live in any syllabus or syllabus-approved career path. Starbound Odyssey wasn't even called that back then. It was just Lunar Game Project, V0.3, in a folder buried under 6 layers of decoy homework. My professors saw me as quiet but competent. My classmates barely noticed me. But at night, when the dorms went quiet and the pressure of my double life settled onto my shoulders like a weighted blanket, I coded, I drew, I dreamed, alone. That's when Ethan came back into my life. We'd met in high school during a summer coding camp. He was lanky, sarcastic, and obsessed with indie games the way other kids were obsessed with bands. We lost touch after graduation, but he'd transferred to UCLA sophomore year. He found me one night in the corner of the student lounge, eyes bloodshot, sketching terrain maps on a tablet like my life depended on it. "You always draw like you're trying to escape something," he said, setting a Mountain Dew beside me. I laughed, for real, the kind that cracked something open. Maybe I am. We started meeting weekly. Ethan got it. The hunger, the secrecy, the way creating something could feel like breathing. He became my co-pilot. We split everything. Code, storyboards, late-night ramen runs. He called our project Starbound first. I added Odyssey later. It felt like ours. It felt real. Still, I didn't breathe a word to my parents. They thought I was acing my courses, heading for a software internship, maybe something respectable at Google. They'd ask about classes and I'd smile and give half-truths. But the more time I poured into the game, the more I felt the lie closing in. Then came the campus tech fair. It was a crowded mess. Booths full of apps no one needed, VR headsets that made people dizzy, and polished posters that screamed, "Fund me." We hadn't even planned to present, but Ethan, ever the chaos agent, had submitted our build at the last second. "You're gonna thank me," he said, sliding our booth banner into place. I didn't believe him. Not until a man with silver hair and a badge reading Nathan A. Thunderbite Studios stopped at our station and asked to play. He played for 20 minutes, didn't say much, just kept tapping the tablet, nodding slowly. Then he looked up. "This is... you two?" "Just us," I said, suddenly aware of how sweaty my palms were. "It's rough," he said, "but there's soul in this, real design sense. You thought about publishing?" I blinked. "Publishing?" "Go full-time. Build it out. You've got something here. Don't let school kill it." He handed me his card and walked off before I could form a reply. That night I couldn't sleep, not because of the compliment, but because deep down I knew what I had to do next and what it would cost. A week later, I sat in the campus cafe with a drop form in my bag. I stared at it for 45 minutes. Then I signed it. The moment the pen left the page, I felt like I'd jumped off a cliff. No parachute, no safety net. Just falling. When I told Ethan, he didn't even blink. "I'm in," he said. "Let's build this thing for real." And we did. Lunar Labs was born inside a rented co-working space in the Mission District, crammed between a digital nomad startup and a legal aid nonprofit. Our office? 2 desks, 3 power strips, and a mini fridge that never worked right. The first few months were brutal. I slept maybe 4 hours a night, surviving on instant noodles, instant coffee, and instant regrets. No investors, no health insurance, just a stubborn belief that we were building something that mattered. And of course, no calls from home. That changed when I finally told them. It was over dinner, Chinese takeout in my parents' living room. I'd come down for Sophie's birthday, and the air was already thick with her residency talk and Kevin's arrival. I waited until dessert. "I'm not at UCLA anymore," I said. The room went still. "What do you mean?" Dad asked, already setting down his chopsticks. "I dropped out last semester. I started a game studio. It's going somewhere." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Mom laughed, cold and hollow. "You're joking." "I'm not." She stood. "You lied to us." "I didn't lie. You said you were in school." "I was. Mom, I'm not wasting my life. I've built something. We're getting downloads. Press. We have traction." Dad just stared at me like I'd said I'd joined a cult. "You're throwing everything away," he muttered. "No," I said, voice shaking. "I'm choosing something that makes me feel alive." Sophie snorted. "So now you're some indie dev genius? Please. You'll be back when you run out of ramen." That one stung more than I wanted to admit. Then Mom said it. "If you walk out that door, you're on your own. No help, no money. Don't come crying when you fail." I stood up. My hands were trembling, but my voice was calm. Too calm. "Then I guess I'm already on my own." I walked out. Didn't cry until I was halfway back to the airport. Back in San Francisco, I moved into a shoebox studio with a leaking ceiling and a neighbor who played Screamo at 2 a.m. The first night there, I stared at the wall and asked myself if I'd made a mistake. But then I opened the game build, watched the characters move, heard the music Ethan had patched in, saw a new review. "This game made me cry, please keep going," and I realized they thought I'd crash, but I was just getting started. You learn to count time differently when you're bootstrapping a dream, not in semesters or holidays or birthday dinners you stopped getting invited to, but in Git commits, bug reports, and ramen flavors you haven't tried yet. In milestones like first crash-free build or no overdraft fee this month. In the quiet victories no one claps for, except maybe your one teammate who's just as sleep-deprived as you are. That was my life in San Francisco. We worked out of this cramped co-working space in the Mission. 4th floor, no elevator, broken AC in summer and heat that only worked when you didn't need it. The windows didn't seal right, so you heard everything. The drunk guy who screamed poetry at 1 a.m., the street saxophonist with only 3 songs, the delivery trucks groaning at dawn. Ethan and I claimed a corner desk near the emergency exit. It smelled faintly of burnt coffee and whiteboard markers. We didn't have much. A couple of loaner monitors, hand-me-down chairs, one dying plant we named Boss Battle, but it was ours. I'd sit there for 12, 14 hours a day, headphones on, fingers tapping out entire worlds. Ethan handled the engine work, particle systems, movement logic, terrain randomization. I did story, design, and visuals. Together we shaped Starbound Odyssey into something that started to feel real, but it was still hard. Some days I'd stare at my code like it was written in another language. Investors ghosted us. Emails went unanswered. Our first ad campaign flopped. The App Store rejected our build 3 times for unclear onboarding. We burned through Ethan's savings. I maxed out my credit card buying a new server when our prototype started crashing. We didn't tell anyone. Not our friends, not our parents, especially not our parents. We ate dollar burritos, wore the same hoodies until they frayed, and avoided conversations about backup plans. There weren't any, but there were moments, tiny flickers that made the grind worth it. Like the night a streamer with 80,000 followers accidentally played our early beta and called it the most emotionally immersive indie game of the year. We didn't sleep that night. We stayed up watching the chat flood with comments. Wait, this is from an indie team? This is giving me Hollow Knight meets Celeste vibes. Whoever wrote this, they've been through some shit, I cried, quietly in the corner of the kitchen next to the broken microwave and a bowl of cold noodles. Not from sadness, but from this strange, aching mix of relief and disbelief. People were seeing it. Me. Not as a dropout, not as a disappointment, but as a creator. We reinvested every dollar from that first wave of downloads. We didn't splurge, no celebrations, just more code, more polish, more hours. Over the next year, we built a proper team. Maya, a UI genius from Seattle. Leo, our composer from Boston, who could turn a broken piano chord into tears. Sophia, our social media lead, who knew how to write tweets that felt like lullabies and rebellion in one breath. We moved into a real office. Okay, it was still small, but it had windows that closed, heat that worked, and our name, Lunar Labs, stenciled on the glass. The walls were bare, but to me, it looked like the future. By the time Starbound Odyssey hit version 1.0, we'd racked up 300,000 downloads, a dozen fan art threads on Reddit, and a cult following that called themselves the Starborn. We got nominated for Indie Game of the Year. People wrote essays about our story arcs. Streamers cried on camera. Kids messaged us saying our game helped them talk to their parents. One fan even proposed to their partner inside the game's final cutscene. Still, my parents knew none of it, not a word. I told myself I was too busy, that I didn't want to rub it in. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was, I didn't want to give them the chance to take credit, or worse, to say nothing, to nod politely like it was fine, like it didn't matter. And then, as if life had a sense of humor, the email arrived. Subject: Sophie's engagement, Nguyen family gathering, a weekend in Irvine, full family reunion. We hope you can make it, the email read, like I hadn't been missing from family events for 3 years straight. I stared at the RSVP button for a long time. Ethan leaned over. You going? I don't know. You should, he said. Crash the party. Win some boss fight XP. I smirked, but inside, I was spiraling. What would I say? That I'd built a game millions played? That I'd made it without them? Would they even care? Still, I clicked yes. 2 weeks later, the day before the flight, I got the news. Starbound Odyssey had been officially nominated for Game Developers' Choice Awards. My hands shook as I read the email. Maya whooped so loud she startled the barista at the cafe across the street. Ethan hugged me, spinning me in circles. I laughed, I screamed, I finally let myself feel it. Then I opened my parents' number on my phone and closed it again. They'd find out when I was ready, and not a second before. I printed out a hard copy of the email, folded it carefully, slid it into the pocket of my coat. If I needed proof, I'd have it. As I zipped up my suitcase, I looked around the studio, the LED fairy lights strung across the ceiling, the framed fan art, the whiteboard with launch countdowns. It didn't look like much to someone else, but to me, it was everything they said I couldn't build, and I was about to walk into their world with a secret they'd never see coming. The moment I pulled into my parents' driveway, I felt it. That tightness in my chest, the one that always came when I crossed into this zip code, like my lungs forgot how to breathe unless I was someone else. The house looked exactly the same. 2 stories, pale beige with dark trim, roses too perfectly pruned, not a weed in sight. The porch light had been replaced, I noticed, brighter, cooler, like it was trying too hard to welcome you. But nothing could soften the weight I felt pressing against my ribs as I sat in the rental car, engine still running. They didn't know who I was now. They still thought I was trying. I turned the car off, stepped out. The warm Southern California sun hit my skin, too sharp after weeks of San Francisco fog. A breeze passed, carrying the faint scent of jasmine and grilled pork. Someone was already prepping for the party. Voices filtered out through the open windows. Laughter, chatter, clinking glass. I walked toward the front door, suitcase rolling behind me, my boots thudding softly against the driveway. A knot tightened in my stomach with every step. When the door opened, it was Sophie who stood there. She looked exactly like the photos, radiant, rested, dressed like someone who knew she belonged in every room she entered. Pale blue silk dress, soft curls framing her face, an engagement ring that sparkled like a lens flare in a movie. "Well, well," she said, arms crossed. "The dreamer returns." I forced a smile. "Good to see you too, Soph." She didn't move to hug me, just turned and walked inside. I followed, trying not to flinch as I passed the threshold. The house was crowded already. Aunts, uncles, cousins, the kind who wore business casual even at home and spoke in LinkedIn-approved compliments. I barely made it 10 feet before Aunt Lynn appeared, squeezing my arm like I was 6 years old again. "Lila, you're so quiet online. We thought you moved to Canada or something." "Nope," I said, smiling tightly. "Still in San Francisco." "Oh," she said, eyes scanning me like a resume. "And you're still coding, right?" "Yep, still coding." She didn't ask more. The living room was a shrine to Sophie. Framed photos from med school, residency, and now engagement shots with Kevin, who hadn't arrived yet, thank God. The coffee table was stacked with bridal magazines and Vietnamese wedding planning books. Mom came out of the kitchen holding a platter of shrimp spring rolls. When she saw me, her smile flickered. "Lila, you made it." I nodded. "Yeah, flight was easy." She glanced down at my jeans and hoodie. "You didn't change?" "I came straight from the airport." "Ah," she said, setting the platter down. "Well, you'll have time to fix up before dinner." She didn't say she was glad I came. Didn't ask how I was. I took a breath and forced another smile. "Need help with anything?" She shook her head. "No, Sophie's been helping all week." Of course she had. Dad came over a moment later, clapped my shoulder like I was a colleague at a company he'd forgotten hiring. "How's the job, Lila?" "It's going well." He nodded. "Still with that tech company?" I hesitated. "I run my own studio now, actually." "Oh," he said. "So you're managing people? That's good. Learning leadership. You could still go back and finish your degree one day. It's never too late." My jaw clenched, but I said nothing. There was no point. To them, success came in very specific packaging. Diplomas, titles, stable paychecks you could explain in 3 words. Game developer was not on that list. In the kitchen, I poured myself some iced tea just to have something to hold. My hands were shaking. I thought of the framed Game Developers Choice Awards nomination I'd left sitting in my apartment. I imagined bringing it here, setting it on the mantel, watching them squint at it like it was written in a language they didn't speak. Maybe it was. "Hey," someone said behind me. I turned. Kevin, tan, tall, clean-shaven in that overconfident way. He wore a tailored button-down and designer loafers, despite the fact that we were standing on tile that still had plastic corner guards. He smiled like a sales pitch. "Heard you're still in tech," he said. "Something like that." He nodded thoughtfully, sipping from a glass of wine. "I'm doing a few VC deals right now, mostly healthcare startups. AI, telemed, you know the buzz. You should connect with my friend Justin. He funds early-stage software plays." I raised an eyebrow. "You don't even know what I do." He chuckled. "Sure I do. Sophie said you make games." "Right. For kids, right?" That made my spine straighten. "No," I said slowly. "Not for kids." "Cool, cool," he said, already looking over his shoulder. "We all start somewhere." Before I could reply, Sophie appeared at his side, slipping her arm into his. "Kevin, Mom needs you to move your car." "On it," he said, kissing her temple and walking off. Sophie turned to me. "Still figuring things out, huh?" "I've got it pretty figured out," I said, voice flat. She shrugged. "Just saying, it's never too late to pivot. Kevin knows people who could get you in the door somewhere real." I didn't answer, because if I did, I was going to explode. Instead, I smiled. Sharp, thin, dangerous. "I'm good, Sophie, but thanks." She blinked, thrown for just a second. Then she walked away. I stood there, the buzz of party noise building behind me, and suddenly I felt like I was floating above it all. Like I was a guest at someone else's celebration, a stand-in, a ghost. Every word that passed through that house felt like a test, every smile a trap, every silence a judgment. But I stayed quiet, because I wanted to see how far they'd go, how deep their assumptions ran, if they still thought I was nothing. because the game hadn't even started yet. Dinner at my parents' house was always a production. There was a kind of theater to it. The perfect place settings, the lacquered wooden chopsticks laid parallel beside porcelain bowls, the faint smell of fish sauce and jasmine rice hanging in the air like memory. Mom's dishes gleamed like something out of a Lunar New Year commercial. Presentation was everything. But as I stood there watching relatives stream in and take their seats, I didn't feel like part of the performance. I felt like a prop, the one everyone pretended not to see. I took the seat farthest from the head of the table. Sophie and Kevin sat across from each other, smiling for photos as if they'd been hired to pose for a wedding catalog. My mom moved between the kitchen and dining room like a general commanding her troops. Dad poured wine for the uncles. Laughter echoed off the marble countertops. No one asked me anything. The clink of chopsticks on ceramic, the polite murmurs between bites, the hum of approval at Mom's lemongrass chicken, it all blurred, until Sophie cleared her throat. "Mom's helping us pick the wedding venue next week," she said, voice sweet and loud enough to draw attention. "We're thinking of doing a destination ceremony in Maui." "Oh, wow, Maui!" Aunt Trin beamed. "So romantic." "And pricey," someone added with a chuckle. Kevin leaned back, casually draping his arm around Sophie's chair. "It's worth it for the aesthetics. Plus, one of my VC partners owns a property there. Should be an easy comp." Sophie smiled like she'd won something. "And Kevin got us a photographer who only works with celebrities. His last shoot was for Vogue." "Impressive," Mom said, dabbing her lips with a linen napkin. Sophie's always known how to plan ahead. I forced a small smile. My fingers tightened around my chopsticks. Then Kevin turned to me. "So, Lila," he said, too casual. "How's work?" I looked up, meeting his eyes. "It's good." He waited, expecting more. When I said nothing, he grinned. "Still in that startup phase, huh? Must be tough. I remember that grind back in the day." I shrugged. "Yeah, the grind's real, but worth it." Cool. And you're still doing the game thing?" "Still. Like it was a phase. Like I should have outgrown it by now." "Yeah," I said, voice calm. "Still doing the game thing." Mom sighed quietly, folding her hands. "We just want you to be stable, Lila. You're not getting younger. Maybe you could talk to Kevin about transitioning into something more reliable. Even part-time consulting?" Sophie chimed in, slicing a piece of grilled fish. "It's not about giving up your dream. It's just smart to have options." "Especially with the way the market's going," Kevin added, nodding solemnly like he was discussing something sacred. I could feel my pulse in my ears. Every word, every comment, it chipped away. Not loud, not cruel, just persistent, like water wearing down stone. "You know," Kevin said, as if suddenly struck by generosity, "you could probably join one of our portfolio companies. They're always looking for junior developers." Junior. I pressed my palm flat against my thigh under the table to keep from shaking. "I'm good," I said quietly. Sophie leaned forward. "We're just trying to help, Lila." "No," I said, sharper now. "You're trying to fix something you think is broken." The table quieted. Forks paused mid-air. Dad cleared his throat. "Let's not make this into something dramatic. It's a family dinner." Of course. The unspoken rule: emotions were only valid if they were convenient. I looked down at my plate. The food was beautiful, perfectly plated, carefully made, and I couldn't taste any of it. Inside, I felt like I was 13 again, sketching alien characters on napkins while everyone else discussed Sophie's cello recitals. Like I was 16, hiding my game builds in folders labeled calc homework. Like I was 20, watching my parents' faces twist when I told them I'd dropped out. Some part of me had hoped maybe this time would be different. But nothing had changed, except me. I wasn't the girl they'd tried to mold anymore. I was something they didn't understand, and didn't try to. Then, just as I was about to excuse myself from the table, a quiet voice spoke. "You know," Uncle Vin said, setting down his teacup, "I tried Lila's game the other night." Everyone turned. I blinked. "You did?" He nodded, calm and deliberate. "A friend's kid posted about it. I figured I'd give it a shot. Not my thing usually, but there was something in it. The story. The design felt like art. A long silence stretched across the table. Then he looked at me, and for the first time that night, maybe in years, I saw something real in someone's eyes. Not pity, not confusion, respect. "Keep doing you, kid," he said with a small nod. My throat tightened. I gave him a shaky smile, eyes burning. That tiny gesture, just a few words, held more weight than everything else combined. Because when no one believes in you, even one voice can sound like a choir. I looked around the table. They still didn't get it. Most of them never would. But in that moment, I didn't need all of them to. I just needed me. And I knew who I was. Every criticism, every side comment, it rolled off a little easier now. I sat up straighter, picked up my chopsticks, took a bite. It was still quiet, but not heavy. Because I wasn't shrinking anymore. Not for them, not for anyone. And deep down, I could feel it. Something was about to shift. The moment that would change everything was almost here. After dinner, someone suggested board games, but Kevin waved it off with a chuckle and a glint in his eye. "Let's play something fun," he said, already pulling out his phone. "There's this new mobile game I've been obsessed with, Starbound Odyssey. Ever heard of it?" I froze. My teacup clinked slightly against the saucer as my fingers twitched. I lowered it carefully, praying no one noticed the tremble. Kevin's voice floated through the air like background noise in a surreal dream. "It's wild. You're this exiled star captain, rebuilding your crew, solving these moral dilemmas, fighting to reclaim your identity in a broken galaxy. Really smart stuff. Super immersive." He tapped on his screen, completely unaware. Sophie leaned over his shoulder. "Wait, I've heard of that one. Kevin, didn't your friend recommend it last week too?" "Yeah, he said it's going viral. Apparently it was made by some tiny studio. No budget, just raw talent." I felt the blood drain from my face. Across the table, Dad was scrolling through his phone, squinting at the screen. "Is this it? Starbound Odyssey? The graphics are surprisingly good." Mom adjusted her glasses and glanced over. "It looks like a movie. Is this really a game?" Kevin nodded. "Told you, it's everywhere. They're even nominated for an award, I think." I wanted to laugh, or scream, or both. But instead, I sat back and watched as my entire family, the same people who had spent years dismissing my dream, downloaded my game like it was the newest toy at Christmas. Sophie tapped rapidly. "Ooh, I just got to the part where you have to choose whether to save your ship or save your crew. This is brutal." Kevin grinned. "Right? That level design is genius. Whoever made this actually understands player psychology." My heart was hammering. I could see it all. The interface, the dialogue trees, the way we'd handcrafted each moral choice to reflect real-world dilemmas. We'd poured ourselves into this game, into every pixel, every line of code, every word of story. And now they were playing it like it was just entertainment. Like it wasn't the thing they'd all said would never amount to anything. Like it wasn't me. Mom was still peering over her phone. "This studio? Lunar Labs? Strange name." I bit the inside of my cheek. "Probably run by a bunch of 20-somethings in a garage," Dad added, chuckling. "Kids these days." "Pretty impressive for a garage," Uncle Bao said, his ship already docking on planet Ether. Sophie narrowed her eyes at the screen. "The main character kind of reminds me of someone." Kevin laughed. "I think they modeled her after one of those Asian space dramas. It's got that stoic leader vibe." "She's too passive," Sophie muttered. "I'd have nuked that planet already." I blinked. They were critiquing her now, the character I had written in my own image, the voice of every part of me they had ignored. It was surreal, watching them interact with something so deeply personal, so utterly mine, and not have the faintest clue. I felt like I was watching people read my diary out loud in a language they couldn't understand. The room buzzed with excitement. They were trading strategy tips, quoting lines from the intro cinematic, praising whoever wrote this. Dad even said, "This part's pretty deep, makes you think." I couldn't breathe. "Lila, you're being quiet," Sophie said, her eyes still glued to her screen. "Not your type of game?" My voice came out softer than I expected. "I've played it before." Kevin raised an eyebrow. Oh yeah? What'd you think of the ending? I think it says more than people realize. He laughed, spoken like someone who got the bad ending. The air in the room felt electric, buzzing with irony so thick I thought I might drown in it. I wanted to stand up, scream, "That's my game, that's my soul. That's the sleepless nights and the ramen dinners and the year I couldn't afford heat. That's the version of me you never asked about." But instead, I watched. I studied their faces, relaxed, amused, engaged. They were immersed, hooked, and they had no idea. Part of me wanted to stay silent forever, just to preserve this strange, twisted theater, to see how far they'd go, singing praises for the very thing they told me would lead nowhere. But then, the doorbell rang, a quick chime, 2 knocks. Sophie glanced up. "Oh, I think that's Ethan and Maya?" I shot up, too late. The front door opened, and there they were. Ethan grinned the second he saw me. "You didn't tell me it was a full-blown family summit." Maya followed behind him, her coat slung over one arm, hair wind-blown from the freeway. "Hope we're not too late. Parking was a nightmare." The room stilled for a second as everyone turned to look. Mom raised an eyebrow. "You didn't mention guests." I moved toward them quickly. "They're part of my team. I asked them to stop by." Maya smiled warmly. "Nice to meet everyone. Big fan of this house. And the smell. Is that Pandan?" Kevin looked confused. "Wait, your team?" Ethan raised an amused eyebrow. "Lila didn't tell you. We work together, Lunar Labs." The silence that followed wasn't loud, but it was deafening. I watched the gears turn in Kevin's head. Maya, blissfully unaware, stepped closer and added, "Oh, and congrats on playing Starbound Odyssey. The team's so pumped about the award nomination. Lila's been busting her butt for months. This party's kind of the first time she's taken a breath." Dead silence. Sophie blinked. "Wait, what?" Maya tilted her head. "Didn't she tell you?" Then she turned to me, brow furrowed. "Oh no," she said, voice dropping. "They didn't know?" Everyone stared at me now, their faces frozen. My heart pounded in my chest like war drums. This was it, the moment I'd been walking toward since the day I clicked submit on my college withdrawal form, and I wasn't running anymore. The silence in the room was thick enough to choke on. Maya's words still hung in the air like a fire alarm no one knew how to turn off. "Lila's been busting her butt for months. This party's kind of the first time she's taken a breath." Mom's hand, still gripping her wine glass, had frozen midair. Dad blinked at Maya like he was trying to translate her English into something that made sense. Kevin's mouth was slightly open, and Sophie had gone absolutely still, her phone screen dimming between her fingers as her expression shifted from confusion to something else. Shock, disbelief, maybe even fear. Maya looked at me, her eyes wide, realizing, "Oh God, they didn't know, did they?" Ethan winced. "Well, now they do." I could hear the wind brushing against the windows, distant traffic, my own pulse thumping in my ears. For a moment, no one said a word. Then Sophie broke the silence. What do you mean, Lila?" I looked at her, at all of them, and for the first time in a long, long time, I didn't shrink. I straightened my back, stepped forward, and took a slow breath. "I mean," I said, my voice steady, "I created Starbound Odyssey." Dead silence. Maya, still holding her tote bag, chimed in awkwardly, "She's the founder of Lunar Labs. That's our company." "She... what?" Kevin said, blinking fast. "You're joking, right?" "I'm not." I looked directly at him, at Sophie, at my parents. "I'm not just on the team. I built it. I wrote the story, designed the world, hired the developers, raised the funding. That game you're all playing, the one you just called genius, that's mine." Dad set his phone down slowly, like he was afraid of breaking it. "Wait, you made that?" "Yes." "But the characters, the planets, He paused. "It's so complex." I almost laughed. "Yeah, I guess it is." Sophie shook her head, blinking like she could reverse time by doing it fast enough. No, you dropped out, you disappeared. You couldn't have..." "I didn't disappear," I said, cutting her off. "You just stopped looking." Her jaw clenched. Kevin let out a low whistle. "You've got to be kidding me." He looked at Maya. "That game is everywhere. I just played it on the plane last week. I thought it was a major studio." "It was 2 of us," Ethan said with a grin. "Then 5, then 10. We grew it ourselves." "And Lila's the reason we exist," Maya added. I could feel their eyes on me now, but not the way I used to. Not like I was invisible, not like I was a failure, but like I was something new, something undeniable. Mom finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, like she was speaking into fog. You've been doing this all along? Yes, I said, for the past 4 years. But why didn't you tell us? I met her gaze. Because every time I tried, you told me it didn't matter, that it wasn't real, that games were a waste of time, that I was wasting my life. Her lips parted. I didn't mean... You did, I said softly. You meant every word. The room was still. I looked at Dad. You asked me to be safe, to be secure, but I was never going to fit into your version of success. I didn't want to write someone else's code or follow someone else's rules. I wanted to build something of my own. His expression faltered. Sophie sat back, arms folded tightly. Her cheeks were flushed. So what, you came here just to humiliate us? No, I said. I came to see if anything had changed. Kevin finally stood, rubbing the back of his neck. Damn, I mean, if you're ever looking for funding... I held up a hand. Don't. He paused, then sat back down slowly. I didn't build this for your approval, I said, my voice rising just slightly. I built it because I couldn't not, because even when no one believed in me, even when my own family laughed, I still believed in the story I had to tell. Uncle Vin smiled faintly from his seat at the end of the table. I always knew, he said quietly. Not the details, but I saw the way you looked when you talked about stories, about building things. It's the same look your grandfather had when he fixed radios during the war. Mom looked down at her hands. Dad exhaled, a long, low sound like he was releasing something he didn't even know he was holding. The air in the room shifted, not cleared, but cracked open. Maya broke the silence with a nervous laugh. Well, this is one hell of a soft launch party. Ethan grinned. At least the appetizers were great. A few people laughed, small, cautious chuckles that didn't quite reach their eyes. But the tension had broken. The truth was out. And I was still standing. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't hiding. I was free. It was strange how fast everything had flipped, like I'd been playing defense my entire life. And suddenly, without warning, I was holding the ball. Now they were the ones with questions, with doubts. And I finally had answers. I glanced at Sophie. Her expression was unreadable. Hurt, maybe, or embarrassed. Maybe both. But for once, I didn't feel the need to fix it. I didn't owe them comfort. What I'd built, what I'd survived, didn't need explaining. Still, I knew what came next. The part I hadn't rehearsed. The part where I told the story they never wanted to hear. The part where I showed them everything they missed while they weren't looking. And that story was just beginning. The quiet after the reveal wasn't silence. It was heavier than that. The kind of quiet where every unspoken word hovered like smoke, too thick to ignore, too fragile to touch. I stood there, heart still racing, breath shallow, eyes sweeping over a room full of stunned faces. Faces I'd grown up trying to please, trying to understand, trying to survive. And now, for the first time, they were listening. I didn't plan to say anything more, but something shifted in me the moment Maya's voice faded, and the weight of truth landed like a stone on the dining table between us. So I stepped forward, not to rub it in, not to win, but because they needed to hear it, and I needed to say it. I didn't just drop out of school, I began, voice low but steady. I dropped out because I couldn't keep living a life that didn't belong to me. They were silent, even Sophie. I spent a year working out of a cramped co-working space in the Mission District, sharing instant noodles and $20 internet with Ethan. We didn't have funding, no safety net, just a prototype and a dream no one but us believed in. Mom's brows knit slightly. She opened her mouth, but I held up a hand. Let me finish. She closed it again. I slept on a mattress on the floor. I skipped meals. I cried into my keyboard some nights because nothing worked and we were running out of time, out of rent, out of hope. I swallowed hard. My hands were cold. I got rejected by 12 publishers, got laughed out of investor meetings, had people call my work a hobby, a fluke, a waste of time. And the whole time, I kept going. I glanced at Dad. His jaw was tense, but his eyes were on mine, because no matter how hard it got, it still felt better than living someone else's dream. I took a breath, shaky but grounded. We launched Starbound Odyssey with zero marketing budget, just word of mouth and late-night Discord chats. Then something happened. People played it. People felt it. Streamers cried. Players wrote us letters. I let that sink in. A teenager in Milwaukee messaged me to say our story helped him come out to his parents. A woman in Seoul said she played it with her daughter every night after chemo, and a dad in New Jersey told me it reminded him what it meant to fight for your family. My voice cracked then, but I didn't stop. Every single download, every player, they saw something in it. In me. That you never did. The words hung there, raw and bare. I built this without your money, without your support, without your pride. Dad looked down. Sophie's eyes glistened, but she didn't blink. Then she said it. I thought you'd fail. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I thought we'd be cleaning up after your mess, that we'd find you broken, that you were just running. I stared at her, waiting for the twist, the defense, the pivot, but it didn't come. I was wrong, she said, and that hit harder than I expected. She wiped at her eyes quickly, like she didn't want to give me the satisfaction. You didn't just survive it, you built something real. Kevin nodded slowly, stunned into silence for once. Dad cleared his throat. I didn't know. I thought we were protecting you. From what? I asked, biting the edge of each word. From disappointment? From failure? Or from the version of me you couldn't control? That stung. I saw it in his face, but he didn't deny it. Mom looked at her lap. Her voice, when it came, was soft and uneven. We were scared, not because we didn't believe in you, but because we didn't understand you. She met my gaze, and for the first time, I saw her not as a judge, not as an opponent, but as a person. Just a woman who didn't know how to love what she didn't recognize. You weren't like Sophie, she said, and that scared me. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I didn't need you to understand, I said. I just needed you to respect it, to respect me. The room was quiet again, but this time it wasn't suffocating. It was open, tentative, like the first breath after a storm. Then Uncle Vin, who had been watching it all from the corner, raised his glass. To the one who made her own map. A small laugh broke out from Maya. Ethan raised his own cup. Kevin joined in. Even Sophie smiled, tired but real. And slowly, so did Mom. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't healed. But for the first time, I wasn't asking for space. I was taking it. Later that night, after most of the guests had filtered out and the kitchen was cluttered with empty dishes and wine-stained napkins, I stood by the patio door staring out into the darkness. The backyard looked smaller than I remembered. The same faded swing set, the same lemon tree that never quite bore fruit. Footsteps behind me. It was Mom. She didn't say anything right away, just stood beside me, arms folded. You used to play back here for hours, she said, making up stories, whole worlds. I nodded. I remember. I thought you were avoiding real life, she said, but you were creating it. She looked at me then, not with pity or confusion, but something quieter, regret, maybe admiration. I'm sorry, she said, for not seeing you. I didn't know what to say, so I just whispered, thanks. The silence between us was no longer sharp. It was soft, healing. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from Maya. You should tell them about the award. They deserve to hear it from you. I stared at the message. My fingers hovered above the screen, because the truth is, this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the first time they were finally listening. And now, I had something else to say. The next morning, the house was quiet in a way it rarely had been. No pots clanging in the kitchen, no cousins shouting over coffee or phones ringing with some wedding task. Just sunlight filtering through the blinds and the soft creak of floorboards as I walked down the hall. I paused by the family photo wall. It was all Sophie. White coat ceremonies, academic medals, posed portraits with Kevin at black tie events. My photo, 8th grade yearbook, hair uneven from a DIY cut, sat half hidden behind a ceramic vase on the lower shelf. I didn't feel bitter, not anymore. because now I understood something. It had never been about just me. It was about what they thought success should look like: safe, predictable, familiar. I stepped into the kitchen and found Dad already there, reading the business section in his UCLA alumni hoodie, glasses slipping down his nose. He glanced up. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep?" A beat passed. Then, as if the weight had to shift somewhere, he folded the paper and gestured to the seat across from him. I sat. The silence between us wasn't tense this time, just cautious. Then, with a cleared throat and no eye contact, he asked, "So, what happens next with the game?" "We're expanding," I said. "New planets, new storylines, possibly an animated short next year if the funding clears." He nodded, lips pressed together. Another pause. "I told my bridge group about it," he said finally. "Your game." That caught me off guard. "Really?" He looked at me, almost sheepish. "They didn't believe me at first, so I showed them the trailer, the music, the reviews." He smiled, small but real. "They were impressed." I swallowed hard. "Thanks, Dad." He shifted uncomfortably. "I should have said it earlier, I just didn't know how to be proud of something I didn't understand." I let that sit for a second. Then I said gently, "You don't have to understand it, just respect it." He nodded. "I do." It wasn't dramatic, no sweeping apology, no tears, just a bridge, finally built, shaky but standing. Later, I found Sophie in the sunroom scrolling through wedding spreadsheets. Her hair was tied back in a messy ponytail, and her laptop was surrounded by fabric swatches and guest lists. "Hey," I said, stepping in. "Busy?" She looked up, guarded. "Always." I sat across from her. The tension between us still hummed like an exposed wire, but it didn't spark. "You okay?" I asked. She hesitated. "I don't know. It's weird." "What is?" "You. All of it. The game, the company. I feel like I missed everything." I nodded. "You did." She looked down, guilt flickering across her face. "I was so focused on being right," she said, her voice lower now, "on winning at life, on proving I was the smart one. I didn't even see what you were building." I studied her for a moment. She wasn't performing anymore, just sitting there, real and raw. "I didn't need you to see it back then," I said, "but I'm glad you do now." She sighed, pushed her laptop aside, and looked at me. "You coming to the wedding?" I blinked. "You want me there?" "I do." She paused, then added with a dry smile, "And if you happen to drop the expansion trailer during the reception, I wouldn't hate the clout." I burst out laughing. She laughed too. For the first time in years, it felt like we weren't on opposite sides of a battlefield. Just two sisters, scarred and stubborn, but slowly starting to meet in the middle. That afternoon, I pulled Maya and Ethan into the garage, our impromptu office, and ran them through the launch timeline for the expansion pack. Ethan was already scribbling edits on a whiteboard we borrowed from the community center down the street. Maya pulled out her phone, snapped a photo of my sketch notes, and grinned. "We're announcing this where?" "Sophie's wedding reception." They both stared. I raised an eyebrow. "What?" "We're storytellers. What's more dramatic than a slow-burn family redemption arc with a product reveal?" Ethan laughed so hard he choked on his coffee. "You're unreal," he said. "I'm just getting started." Later that night, Mom knocked on my door. She was holding a box, small, old, and taped at the corners. "I found this in storage," she said. "Thought you might want it." I opened it slowly. Inside were dozens of sketchbooks, my old ones, from when I was 10, 12, 17, filled with spaceships, characters, bits of dialogue written in colored pens, and on top, folded carefully, was a letter I'd written at 16, never sent, to USC's game design program. Mom sat beside me, watching. "I threw that away once," she said, "then fished it out of the trash. I don't know why." I smiled, tears pressing at the corners of my eyes. "I do." She put her hand over mine. "I'm sorry it took me this long to show up. You're here now." She looked down, blinking fast. "I'd like to come to your next showcase if that's okay." I nodded. And just like that, another thread stitched itself back in place. Before I left for San Francisco, we all sat down for brunch. It wasn't fancy, Just banh mi, scrambled eggs, and strong Vietnamese coffee. But it was the first meal we'd had together in years that didn't feel like a stage play. Sophie showed me her wedding playlist. Kevin asked if I'd consider letting him playtest our next update. Mom told me she was trying to understand Steam, and Dad, he told a neighbor that his daughter was an award-nominated game designer. For once, I didn't flinch at the word daughter. It felt right. As I packed my bags later that afternoon, I glanced out the window and caught a glimpse of my reflection in the glass. Same hoodie, same dark circles under my eyes. But something had changed. I wasn't returning home wounded or bitter or half-formed. I was whole. I was enough. And San Francisco was waiting. Because my story wasn't over. It was just beginning to echo beyond me, and someone else needed to hear it next. Back in San Francisco, the air felt different. Maybe it was the early morning fog curling like smoke over the Bay Bridge, or the way sunlight hit the pavement outside the studio, pale and cold but honest. Or maybe it was just me, coming home not with something to prove, but with something to carry forward. The office was quiet when I arrived. Ethan's hoodie was slung over the back of his chair. Maya's notes were stuck to the edge of the monitor like confetti from a brainstorm session that ran too long. A leftover donut hardened in the break room beside a half-written post-it. Do not eat this. Seriously, it's a science project now. I dropped my bag by the door and stood for a second, just taking it all in. It wasn't the biggest studio, not the sleekest, but it was mine. And more than that, it was ours. My desk was exactly how I'd left it. Cluttered, chaotic, alive. A framed fan drawing of the star-bound protagonist, Captain Liss, smiled from the corner. On my monitor, the pre-alpha build of our expansion pack loaded automatically, flickering to life with stars spilling across a pixelated sky. I clicked play. As the opening notes of the theme swelled in my headphones, I felt something settle deep in my chest. Not pride, not relief, clarity. I didn't need my family's approval anymore, because somewhere along the way, I had stopped needing to be seen and started learning how to see myself. Later that week, I stood in front of a group of teenagers at the Boys and Girls Club in the Tenderloin, a whiteboard behind me and a question scrawled across it. What world would you build? Mia, a 15-year-old in oversized overalls and a black hoodie, raised her hand. She had that hungry look in her eyes, the one I used to catch in my own reflection years ago, back when no one was watching. Can you really make a living doing this? She asked cautiously. I smiled. If you're ready to work harder than you ever thought possible, and if you're okay with people telling you no 1,000 times, then yeah, you can. She nodded slowly. Even if no one gets it? Especially if no one gets it. After the session, Mia lingered. She pulled a battered sketchbook from her backpack, flipping to a page with a lopsided robot and a sun made of circuit boards. It's not much, she said. I studied it. It's something. She beamed like I'd handed her a key. That night, back at Lunar Labs, I stayed late, watching the new voiceover files upload to the server. Our lead actress had re-recorded the expansion's final monologue, and this time, I'd rewritten it. More raw, more honest, less polish, more pulse. It ended with a line I hadn't intended to write, one that surprised even me. The stars aren't there to guide you. They're just reflections. You are the light. I sat back in my chair, staring at the waveform blinking across the screen. Ethan wandered in, holding 2 coffees. You always rewrite when you're emotional. It's better this way. He handed me the coffee. So, when are you telling your family about the next game? I raised an eyebrow. You mean the one where we time travel through grief and generational guilt in a post-capitalist solar system? That's the one, I laughed. Soon, he grinned. Tell them it's about taxes. They'll pay attention. The next morning, I checked my phone and saw a message from Sophie. Sophie, sent you a song idea for the wedding trailer. Tell me what you think. Also, Mom wants your Steam ID. She's trying to beat level 3 without crying. I laughed so hard I snorted coffee through my nose. That Sunday we had brunch. For real this time. No speeches, no comparisons, just crispy garlic toast, soft scrambled eggs, and conversations about video games and travel plans and how Uncle Vin finally figured out how to stream on Twitch. Mom asked about our next update. Dad showed me a photo of him wearing a Starbound Odyssey hoodie at his bridge club. Sophie, always extra, said she might name her dog Liz. I didn't cry. Not then. But later, walking home through the city as dusk spilled over the streets, I ducked into an old arcade on Mission. It was nearly empty, the kind of place with sticky floors, flickering bulbs, and cabinets that still smelled faintly of popcorn and solder. I slid a token into an ancient machine, Cosmic Drift, the very first game I'd fallen in love with on Dad's computer. The pixels blinked awake, glitchy and stubborn. My fingers found the buttons like I'd never left. Up, left, fire. As the music kicked in, I felt 10 years old again, but also 28, battle-scarred, bold, becoming. Every pixel I had ever created, every moment I stitched into code, had been for her. The little girl with the notebook under the covers, the teenager no one clapped for, the woman who didn't wait for permission to exist. A notification buzzed on my phone. Nominee announcement, Game Developers' Choice Awards. Starbound Odyssey, finalist, Game of the Year. I stared at it, not shocked, not breathless, just still. Because this wasn't the end. This was the moment I realized what legacy actually meant. Not fame, not even family approval, but impact. The lives you touch because you dared to speak when no one wanted to hear your voice. The spaces you carve out of rejection, the light you carry forward for someone else. As I left the arcade and stepped into the neon twilight, my phone buzzed again, a message from Mia. Mia, I started building my game. It's clunky, it's messy, but I think I'm starting to find my voice. Thanks for believing in me. I smiled, eyes stinging with something that felt like peace, because my story was echoing now, and hers was just beginning. The office lights hummed softly above me as the city outside blinked into dusk. I was alone at my desk, fingers curled around a cup of ginger tea, watching the final render of Starbound Odyssey's expansion trailer. The screen pulsed with color. Swirling galaxies, pixelated planets, the familiar silhouette of Captain Lise against a backdrop of stars that felt more like memory than fiction now. And layered beneath it all was the new score Leo composed, haunting, hopeful, unfinished in all the right ways. This was what we'd built. And more than that, this was what I'd chosen. Creating Starbound Odyssey wasn't just about coding a game. It was about carving out a voice from silence, building a story when no one believed there was one worth telling. The cursor blinked at the end of the final cutscene file, and then, quietly, I added the last line of the narrator's voiceover. Some journeys don't begin with a map. They begin with a memory and the courage to leave it behind. I leaned back and exhaled. Behind me, the soft creak of the studio door, Maya stepping in with 2 bubble teas and a bag of mango gummies. "You finish it?" she asked, already handing me the drink with my initials scrawled in black marker. I nodded. "Yeah. Trailer's locked. Upload goes live tomorrow." She dropped onto the couch. "Think they're ready?" I looked at the glowing screen, at the characters who felt like family, at the worlds we built when we had nothing but faith and a dream. "They don't need to be ready," I said. "We are." Later that night, I walked the halls of our studio in the dark, letting my fingers trail along the whiteboards and sticky notes, sketches of alien flora, dialogue trees from early builds, scraps of poetry Maya swore were placeholder names. We used to joke that we were building the universe out of duct tape and stubbornness. And maybe we were. But now we were building legacy. I stopped by the glass door, looking out over the city, the skyline glittering like a board of blinking LEDs, infinite possibilities. Then my phone buzzed. A photo from Sophie, Mom, sitting on the couch, controller in hand, playing the game on their new console. Her posture was stiff, but focused. Caption, Level 6 boss. She won't admit it, but she's obsessed. I laughed. Then came another message. Sophie, she said she wants to come to GDC if you win. She asked if she'd need a badge. I stared at the screen for a moment. That wasn't just pride. That was something else. That was belief. The next day, I met Mia outside a local bookstore. She held a laptop case like it was something sacred. "I got into that summer program," she said, eyes wide. "Game narrative track. They gave me a scholarship." I didn't try to play it cool. I pulled her into a hug, squeezing tightly. "That's amazing," I said. "You earned it." She pulled back, then hesitated. "I almost didn't apply," she admitted. I thought, why bother? I tilted my head. "What changed?" "You did," she said. We sat on the bookstore steps sharing a lemon scone, watching the city breathe around us. The clatter of the streetcar, the murmur of a protest forming in the square, someone strumming a guitar off-key nearby. And I thought, this is it. This is what it means to make something that lasts. Not sales, not awards, but impact. Mom once said success was safety, but I think success is honesty. It's waking up and knowing that even if you're misunderstood, even if you're doubted, you didn't compromise your voice. It's the courage to create when silence feels easier. It's building when no one else sees the blueprint but you. And it's choosing to keep building even when you're told you shouldn't. Weeks later, at the Game Developers' Choice Awards, I stood backstage with Maya and Ethan, watching our trailer flash across the big screen. The crowd clapped, some cheered, but in my head, it all faded. All I could see was the first night Ethan and I sat in that co-working space, staring at our empty screens, wondering if we were crazy. All I could hear was my mom's voice saying, "Games are for kids." And then I heard her now, laughing with Sophie over takeout as they tried to beat a puzzle I'd designed when I was 20 and full of doubt. We didn't win that night. But as I walked off the stage, phone buzzing with love from players all over the world, I realized I already had everything I ever needed. Weeks later, back in the studio, we celebrated in true Lunar Labs fashion. Mismatched pizza slices, boba spills, Maya's playlist jumping from indie rock to Vietnamese ballads. I raised my glass, a plastic cup half full of flat soda, and said simply, "To the dreamers, the ones they underestimate, the ones who write code in silence and build galaxies from rejection." Everyone cheered, and in that messy, beautiful chaos, I realized my story was never about revenge. It was about reclamation, about finding my way back to myself. And lighting the path for someone else. Because if you're watching this and you've been told your dream is silly or fragile or impractical, don't let them shrink it. Build it anyway, even when you're scared, especially then, because the greatest adventure is living your truth. If this story resonated, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of resilience and triumph. Drop a comment below. Have you ever defied expectations to chase a dream? Share your story. And if someone in your life needs a reminder to keep going, don't forget to share this video with them. Your voice matters. Keep building.